How does a startup have to change its marketing approach from the early adopters to the early majority?
So all of a sudden, the marketing messaging goes from talking about yourself and your product to talking about the customer's problem, why that problem cannot realistically be solved with current technology, and why your technology can change the game.
Why does limiting yourself to a smaller market assist you in getting to the mainstream market?
Well, an ecosystem only forms around a company that's the leader. And so when you're a little company, you can't lead a big market. You're too small. But you could lead a little market that needs you desperately.
Skeptics. Is there any point in trying to target these skeptics?
No. The skeptics are, for whatever reason, they're just committed not to buy into your narrative in any possible way.
Welcome. My name is Daniel Droulet, and I'm the president of the Global Young Entrepreneur Society. The Global Young Entrepreneur Society is an international organization that supports exceptional young people in achieving entrepreneurial growth. My guest today is Geoffrey Moore. Jeff is an author, speaker, and advisor who splits his consulting time between startup companies in the Wildcat Venture Partners portfolios and established high-tech enterprises, most recently including Salesforce, Microsoft, Autodesk, and Google. Jeff is the author of 8 books, most prominently Crossing the Chasm, which has sold more than 1 million copies. Jeff has co-founded 3 consulting firms, the Chasm Group, Chasm Institute, and TCG Advisors. Today, he's chairman emeritus of all 3. Jeff is a venture partner at Wildcat Venture Partners and is the managing director of Geoffrey Moore Consulting. I'm pleased to welcome Geoffrey Moore.
Hey, Daniel, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me on your show.
Well, it's great to have you on. Today, you're one of the most respected authors in the field of high-tech startups. What were the major milestones in your career?
I have a degree in medieval and Renaissance English literature. And I was a professor until we decided to relocate back to the area, and there were no jobs in academics at that time. So I took a job in a software company, and this made all the difference. I got involved eventually in sales and marketing. It turns out marketing was what I was best at. And I went to a marketing consulting firm called Regis McKenna, and that was a game changer. That firm in the 1980s was the premier high-tech marketing firm in the world. And so it allowed me to see a lot of different companies going through this same set of high-tech marketing challenges. And that's what led to the book, Crossing the Chasm. And Crossing the Chasm, it was interesting. It was a slow burn. It sold like 3,000 copies the first 6 months, 6,000 the next 6, 12,000 the next 6, and it just kind of kept going and going. And that's what allowed me to form the Chasm Group and do all the other things. The book resonated with people, and today it's still. I've redone the book twice with all new examples because after 30 years, the companies are all new, but the book is the same. And so it allowed people to work with that book up to today. In fact, Wildcat is raising a fund right now called the Crossing the Chasm Fund because it's still relevant.
Could you please explain the basic concept of the chasm when marketing high-tech products?
So the whole idea of the chasm grew out of something called the technology adoption lifecycle, where high-tech products, because they're disruptive, require people to make changes in their behavior in order to adopt them. And different personas buy into that value proposition at different points. So what we called the early market were the technology enthusiasts and the visionaries who both kind of believed what you believe. If you're the entrepreneur, they believe what you believe. They resonate with your messages. They see your vision. They share their vision with you. You're all together excited about the potential of this new breakthrough capability. But the mainstream market is committed to the status quo, to the current way of doing things. And they're very reluctant to change that. So that's what creates the chasm. It separates the visionaries and the technology enthusiasts on one side, and the pragmatists and the conservatives who are on the other side. And so crossing the chasm is a really important point in the history of any entrepreneurial effort, because you win the early market, so that's not easy in itself. But then to change your messaging and cross the chasm, that it requires a very big change in orientation, because you go from talking about how wonderful the opportunity is, which is what the technology enthusiasts and the visionaries resonate with, to how tough the problems are that the pragmatists are trying to deal with and how your solution could help them solve a tough problem. But they don't want to talk about your solution. They want to talk about their tough problem. And they want to see you as the problem solution, not as some wonderful technology. So it's a complete change in marketing orientation, and that's what crossing the chasm requires.
How does the startup have to change its marketing approach when transitioning from the early adopters to the early majority?
Yeah, and the early majority would be the pragmatists, and the early adopters would be the visionaries and technology enthusiasts. Yeah, it's really important. For the early market, you talk about yourself. You talk about the technology. You talk about your product. You demo your product. You work with people to talk about how powerful this new technology could be. When you cross the chasm, pragmatists are not interested in those things. They have their own businesses to run. You have your business. They don't want to learn about your business. What they do have, however, are problems they can't solve today. And so all of a sudden, the marketing messaging goes from talking about yourself and your product to talking about the customer's problem, why that problem cannot realistically be solved with current technology, and why your technology can change the game. And then you commit to say, we've committed our company to solving this problem for this group of customers. And we will do whatever it takes to make sure that they are successful. And that's what gives you permission to enter the mainstream market. Because normally they would go, you're not proven, you don't have references, we're not going to let you into our market yet. But if you say, look, you don't have anything in your market that can solve this today, we can. Are you sure you wouldn't let us in? And they will go, if you really commit to solve this problem, we'll let you in. And that's how you get into the mainstream market.
In your book, Crossing the Chasm, you said that you should first become the market leader in a small market before targeting the mainstream market. Why does limiting yourself to a smaller market assist you in getting to the mainstream market?
Yeah, this is really a key idea, and it's a little bit counterintuitive because people who start new companies have very big ideas and they want them to have global impact. But the key to having global impact or impact at any level of size is to have an ecosystem of partners and customers who support you. In other words, who buy your products routinely and who build their products on top of your products, or they help install your products, or they help your customers train and use your products, whatever it is. Well, an ecosystem only forms around a company that's the leader. And so when you're a little company, you can't lead a big market. You're too small, but you could lead a little market. So and what kind of a little market? Well, you want to lead a little market that needs you desperately. So that's this idea of when you cross the chasm, we called it the beachhead market, the place where you land first. And what you want to do there is you want that market to be big enough to matter to you, but small enough to lead. So you have to be realistic about it's sort of like a fish to pond ratio. You want to be a big fish in a small pond. So if let's suppose you had $1 million worth of sales. And let's suppose you say, I'm going to double my sales. I'm going to have $2 million worth of sales. Well, you might be able to lead a market that's $5 million, but you couldn't lead a market that's $100 million. You'd be just 2 million out of 100. You couldn't be the leader. So it's really important to be the leader because that's who the ecosystem forms around. Now, initially, it's a tiny ecosystem, but it's a real ecosystem. And then as you grow, it grows. And that's how you're able to grow from small to big. But if you try to go big initially, you just get lost.
How do you sell your product to the skeptics? Is there any point in trying to target them?
No. The skeptics are, for whatever reason, they're just committed not to buy into your narrative in any possible way. And it's a little bit like the people right now who won't get vaccinated. You could talk to them all day. You could give them every offer. They're just not going to do it. And so and particularly for an entrepreneur, I would say for an entrepreneur, it's really important initially you find your visionary and technology enthusiasts, early market customers. And then it's incredibly important when you cross the chasm to find those first pragmatic customers who are willing to give you a shot and then to build off of them. I think from then on, your emphasis can be less and less. The conservatives are interesting because in the old days, when you sold a product, once you'd sold the product, if the product worked, you could leave. And it was the customer's problem to get value out. But in the current world where we're doing everything as a service, right? So you have Amazon Web Services and you have software as a service and you have everything as a service. Conservatives are actually an increasingly powerful customer group because they're the people that stay with you. And if they leave, your business model doesn't work. So we've completely revamped the tech marketing in the 21st century to focus more on customer success and less on product support, which is kind of, in the 20th century, we just focused on product support. But now it's like, no, and you still have to support your product, but now you got to go the extra mile and make sure there's customer success, because you don't want your customers to churn out of your customer base and go away, because that just takes all the air out of your business model.
How do you know when to monetize?
If you have enough capital supporting you, the later you monetize, the better.
As a venture capitalist, are you happy to wait years and years for a startup to monetize?
Well, the venture deal is to play exactly this game, which is, hey, there's a new technology coming. It's going to change the world. Somebody is going to become very, very, very powerful and rich based on this technology.
Is there any sense in investing in public companies that are not yet making a profit?
An investment is a good investment if the combination of its growth rate and its profit add up to 40 or more.
You have talked about a different model for consumer products. Could you please walk us through the 4 gears model?
The reason why consumer is different from business to business is when you sell something business to business, you have to convince a number of people in order to get a purchase order. So you have to, first of all, the people who are going to use the product have to agree. Then the people who might be technical who are going to support the product have to agree. And then the people who provide the budget have to agree. And so it's a very complicated, orchestrated piece of work. And you spend a lot of time bringing the customer together. It takes a direct sales effort, face-to-face or maybe Zoom to Zoom. Consumer product market works very differently. It's much more of a try it and see if you like it. So in a try it and see if you like it thing, and with digital, it's perfect, right? Because digital, it literally costs you nothing to deliver a free offer to anybody anywhere in the world, or very, very, very close to nothing. So in that model, the question is, well, how then do you get from little to big? And so we talked about the 4 gears, and the idea is you want to get these 4 gears all spinning together, but you kind of start them up in a sequence. So the first gear we call engage. And engage just means, can you create a digital offer that people like, that people will use? And you can monitor it. You can just watch them, on the web. Do they click? Do they come back? How long do they stay with the offer? Do they explore it, or do they just click twice and leave, right? Until you can find something that's really, really engaging, there's no point in spending any more money, because in this market, you need people to like using your product. Once you've got engage going, you can start spinning up a second gear, which we call acquire. And that's simply to get more people engaged, right? You're still not charging money yet, but now you're trying to build a sort of momentum around, and maybe a reputation, and maybe some what we call viral marketing around, wow, this is really pretty cool. You should show your friends. Well, hey, you should show me. Well, I've got one of these. Well, you've got one of those. And so now all of a sudden, acquire and engage are reinforcing each other, because your friend's doing it. Well, if your friend's doing it, I'm going to do more of it. I have a little grandson who's 7 years old, and Minecraft for him is like the most engaging thing in the world. And his friends do it, and they reinforce them. So acquire and engage. And then the third one is enlist. And enlist is when you get a subset of your customers to go, I believe in this experience so much, I'm going to proactively tell the world about it. I'm going to talk about it on Facebook or TikTok or Instagram or there's all these digital marketing programs, right? And again, that now acquire, engage, enlist, acquire, engage, enlist. And you see what you're building more and more and more and more momentum around this offer, spreading more and more. And then, and only then, would you monetize. Because as soon as you start monetizing it, you're going to slow the gears down. But eventually you have to monetize. It's a business. You have to be able to fund yourself and essentially make profits and invest them in other things, or invest them in making it a better experience, whatever. So the 4 gears are engage, acquire, enlist and monetize. And a successful company like a Google or a Facebook or a TikTok or any of those companies, they all have those four gears going crazy. And then once you're at scale, like if you are a Google or you are a Facebook or you're LinkedIn or whatever, then you ask the question, well, which of our gears is slowing us down a little bit? Do we need to focus more on acquisition? Do we need to focus more on engagement? Maybe it's enlistment. Maybe it's monetization. How should we make that work? And so those four gears are the things you keep testing as you grow your company going forward in a consumer business. That's how you think about, well, where am I going to invest my next dollar going forward?
How do you know when to monetize?
Part of it is how much optionality do you have? If you have enough capital supporting you, the later you monetize, the better, really. Because think about Google didn't monetize until quite late. Netscape with their original web browser didn't monetize until quite late. Facebook didn't monetize until quite late, because the bigger the install base you have, the more powerful the monetization will be when it comes. But if you don't have capital, sometimes you have to monetize very early, and then what you might do is have what they call a freemium offer, where you say, well, you can have it for free, but if you want to upgrade the experience, you can add this money. So you're still trying to keep it viral, but you're also trying to begin the monetization. And like in games, a lot of times they'll say, well, the game is free, but you have to buy extra, dragons, or you have to buy. Again, my grandson's into dragons in these games around taming your dragon, and he's always wanting to buy, more dragon killing gold things or whatever it is. Well, that's another way to monetize as well.
As a venture capitalist, are you happy to wait years and years for a startup to monetize?
Well, that's what venture capital is designed to do. Venture capital is an interesting world because the people that fund venture capitalists are called limited partners. And those people have money to invest. They're high net worth families, they're governments, they're pension funds, whatever. They want to invest money and get a return. Now, some of their money they put in much more less risky investments. They'll invest in I don't know if they'll invest in bonds, but they'll invest in stocks. They'll have a portfolio of investments of various risks. Venture is more of the high risk, high return part of their portfolio. Well, the venture deal is to play exactly this game, which is, hey, there's a new technology coming. It's going to change the world. Somebody is going to become very, very, very powerful and rich, or some company, based on this technology. Don't know whether it's going to be Yahoo or Google. Don't know whether it's going to be Shopify or Amazon, but somebody's going to do it. Somebody's going to get there. So let's put a lot of money in right now. Is it going to be Uber or Lyft? Is it going to be Airbnb or vacation rental by owner? Who's it going to be? But you say, I'm going to put money in now, and I'm willing to not get a return. Like Uber today, it still has this huge valuation, and it still loses money. But people are saying, yeah, keep losing money because the reason you're losing money is not because you don't have a good business. It's because you're plowing it back in to get even more business and get into Uber Eats or Uber this or Uber that. So the venture model is we'll put up the money now and we will reap the rewards later. That is a very different model from almost any other investment situation. If you went to a public stock market, the public stock markets do not support that kind of risk and return. So venture is a very unique model in that respect.
Venture capitalists are investing a very small portion of very large portfolios. But for individuals, is there any sense in investing in public companies that are not yet making a profit?
When you invest in a company, you buy what they call a share. You buy shares in the company, right? Which means what you're really buying is a share of their future profits. So why would you invest in a company that's losing money? You would say, well, first of all, they could stop losing money anytime they want to. That's number one. If they're really losing money and they can't stop losing money, you should not invest in them. But if the reason they're losing money is instead of turning it into profit, they're just plowing it back into more growth, you say, okay, well, I could do that. So the venture community has come up with a nice rule, which I think your listeners should learn, which is called the rule of 40. And the rule of 40 says an investment is a good investment if the combination of its growth rate and its profit add up to 40 or more. So if you have no growth, but you're making 40% profit, that's a heck of a business. If you have no profit, but you're growing at 40% or more, that's also a heck of a business. If you're growing at 20% and you have 20% profit, you see how that works. So under that, if you apply the rule of 40 to the public companies that are losing money but have high valuations, you'll find that they all are doing better than the rule of 40, and that's why their valuations are high.
Based on your experience advising startups, what are the factors that make a startup successful?
Yeah, I think there's three that I come back to again and again. The first one I call trapped value. And by the way, let me be clear, I advise B2B startups, business to business. I really am not very good at consumer. So I'm more of the business to business startups. So keep that in mind. But in the business to business world, the first key thing the startup has to do is it has to find what I call a pocket of trapped value. And what that means is that in that industry or in that business process today, the way it runs today, it's inherently inefficient. It's much more expensive than it would have to be if you could do it in a different way. And so it's like the taxi cab business versus Uber. I mean, there was an enormous amount of trapped value in the taxi cab business that Uber was able to go after. And Airbnb and hotels. There's an enormous amount of trapped value in the hotel, high capital. You got to keep every room, whether you're using it or not. Huge population of people to take care of the hotel. Airbnb owns no properties and owns no property managers. So it's an enormous amount of trapped value that they were able to go after. Okay. The second thing is you then have to have the breakthrough innovation. So whether that was the Uber, I can recruit drivers and I can manage drivers virtually via their iPhones or Android phones. That was their breakthrough. In the case of Airbnb, could I pull together this community and create this two-sided marketplace of people that want to go to other cities and people that would be willing to rent out a room? They were able to do that on the web. It was amazing. That was their breakthrough. But you have to have a breakthrough innovation that gets the trap value in a way that nobody else has ever been able to do it before. So that's sort of trapped value, breakthrough innovation. And then the third factor is the entrepreneurial leader. And the entrepreneurial leader has to be willing to make high-risk decisions with low data, which is that's a big ask, right? In other words, by the time you have in an emerging market, by the time you have enough data to make the decision, it's too late. You have to make the decision earlier, and therefore you have to have this ability to make a high-risk decision and then be willing to change your mind in the middle if pivot or do whatever you have to do in order to get to the finish line. Well, there's an entrepreneurial personality that's very talented at doing that. Many people who are very successful business people are not talented at doing this. And one of the keys to successful venture investing is to understand the entrepreneurial mindset and to make sure that the people you invest in are strong in those capabilities, as opposed to somebody says, well, I worked for 20 years at IBM or JP Morgan or some amazing place. Yes, you did, but you're probably not an entrepreneur. And therefore, you're probably not the right person to lead a venture-backed investment.
Which areas of technology do you expect to offer the most opportunity for startups in the coming years? We
are not going to use commercial real estate the way we have in the past. Not for offices, not for retail. The two biggest uses of real estate, we're not going to use them that way anymore. We are going to, I think, relocate manufacturing back in country. We're going to pull manufacturing out of China.
What is your take on work-life balance?
The entrepreneurial culture itself is workaholic. I mean, these are the people that I consult with see work as their identity. Is it for the money? Well, the money is sort of like a way of keeping score. But do people play football for the score? No, they play football to play football, but they want to win. If you over-rotate to work, you under-rotate to family and self, and you can burn out and you can burn your family out.
In the case of Google, Larry Page and Sergey Brin started the company, but then they brought in experienced executive Eric Schmidt to run the company. Does it make sense to bring in an experienced executive to run your startup?
I would say to run the startup, no, but as the startup starts to scale, yes. So what happens is after you cross the chasm, we call there's a period, there's an experience with the technology adoption lifecycle that's the exact opposite of the chasm. It's called, we call it, the second book I wrote was called Inside the Tornado. And a tornado is when the pragmatist community all decide virtually all at once, this is the next big thing and we all have to have it now. So it goes from, I don't think so. And by the way, the reason this works that way, pragmatists tend to ask other pragmatists, are you doing this? And in the chasm, you say, are you doing it? No. Are you doing it? No. Okay, I won't either. That's the chasm. The tornado is, are you doing this? You are? You are? You are? Oh my God, I will too. So it's very much of a herd effect, right? But in the tornado, what happens is there's this huge influx of demand that happens very rapidly. In a business-to-business market, when it's happened, when for the first year, when you go to sell your new idea, the customer already has a budget for it. Prior to that year, they didn't. Prior to that year, part of the challenge of being an entrepreneur is you have to help the customer create budget to buy your new thing because it's not in their budget. In the tornado, it is in their budget for the first time, and they're going to spend it this year. So either you're going to win that deal or somebody else is going to win the deal. But the deal is going to go down this year. And if somebody else wins 10 deals and you only win 5, they're going to be the leader, not you, which means the ecosystem is going to organize around them, not you. You're going to be a second or third or fourth or fifth player in the industry, and you will get a diminished share. So Apple gets most of the money out of mobile, and AWS is getting most of the money out of cloud, and Microsoft got most of the money out of Windows, and that kind of thing. So anyway, in that situation now, in the tornado, it's no longer, do I want to have an entrepreneurial, intuitive, low data, high risk person? I now need a real operational powerhouse, somebody who is very data driven, who uses data in a very powerful way, and who uses it to scale. And so, and it can build out the financial processes, can go internationally. Like Uber, for example, was incredibly successful in the US, but stumbled internationally because Travis Kalanick, who was the entrepreneur, and he was a very entrepreneurial entrepreneur, I assure you, was not good at that kind of scaling. They didn't have an Eric Schmidt until quite late in the game, and it cost them. And by the way, Larry and Sergey, it wasn't Larry and Sergey that brought in Eric Schmidt, it was John Doerr. I mean, it was the investors who did that to make sure that there was a level of scalability, while at the same time, you don't want to curtail the brilliance of the entrepreneur. I mean, Google, part of the scalability of Google was the technology itself, and that you don't want to compromise. But what you did want to do is understand all the business processes and employment and, just all the stuff that it takes to run a global enterprise. Entrepreneurs are not typically good at that. They get bored with it. They are impatient with it. They want to go to the next new thing. But as you scale, you got to focus on the current things very carefully.
As a venture capitalist, what qualities do you look for in startup founders?
Well, so I think that there are two key things. And often you invest in what we call a two-headed entrepreneur, because there's a technical founder and a business founder. In the technical founder, what you're looking for is somebody who is clearly a rock star at the technology. If you're going to be using blockchain, or you're going to be using, cybersecurity, or whatever the heck the new thing's going to be, one of the two founders needs to be not just good at it; they need to be great at it. Okay, so good because you want to be able to use that as quickly as possible, as powerfully as possible. The other founder is the business founder, and that's the person who has the instinct for trapped value and how to sell to the visionaries initially. They're charismatic, so that they can have conversations with visionary executives, and visionary executives will respond, even though this person is not from a big company. There's something about them that, and often they speak at conferences, and people come up to them afterwards because they're that charismatic, and they say, "Wow, this is really great." And then there's got to be the same person who can also lead the team, recruit talent. One of the places that most startups fail is not actually with the initial 2 or 3 or 4 people, but when they go to start hiring the next 15, they don't know how to hire people that are the very best at what they do. They tend to hire people that are not quite as good as they are. And then, of course, those people hire people that are not quite as good as they are. So you get a good company. But the problem with being a startup, good startups don't normally survive. You have to be a great startup. And so that requires the ability to identify talent and to actually not fill a job until you can find somebody who's really a rock star at doing that kind of work. And that's hard because you need the person today. But if you bring in somebody who's okay but not great, and that sets the bar for the rest of the company, and it slows everybody else down to some degree. And speed is the key to being a startup. You need to be as fast and as agile as you possibly could be. So I would say that recruiting is probably this one, and that's where I think having a venture capital board member can help, because venture capitalists are very good at this particular skill of identifying who are what they call the A players, they're really the best players, and that's really, really helpful to an entrepreneur.
Which areas of technology do you expect to offer the most opportunity for startups in the coming years?
Yeah, I'm not a technology. I always start with the trapped value first. So you can start with the technology if you're a technologist. I'm not. There's obviously a lot of very cool technology out there right now. I mean, this decade is still going to be a decade where just getting everybody digitally transformed is going to be a monstrous amount of work this decade. Now with the pandemic, getting people to understand how do we redesign the work environment, and there's going to be just a huge amount of money spent there, and entrepreneurs should be able to do very, very well, frankly, without having to go to particularly disruptive technologies. But in any case, I'm not really the technology guy. I am the trapped value guy. In other words, what I would say is, where do I think value is trapped today? And I think the most obvious place is, well, it's certainly trapped in commercial real estate, because we are not going to use commercial real estate the way we have in the past. Not for offices, not for retail. I mean, the two biggest uses of real estate, we're not going to use them that way anymore. Now, we are going to, however, because of geopolitical risk, we are going to, I think, relocate manufacturing back in country. And by the way, I think Central Europe has a really important role to play in the next generation of manufacturing, because we're going to pull manufacturing out of China, which is like, we just spent 2 decades getting it going in China at a world-class capability. The Chinese are by far the best manufacturers in the world, but because of geopolitical risk, we're going to have to relocate it. So that's going to create a bunch of entrepreneurial opportunities, I think, for people in many countries. But I think of Central Europe as potentially a manufacturing hub for the continent, at least, for sure. So anyway, I look at trapped value rather than technology for opportunity.
Where do you see the trapped value in commercial real estate?
Sure. Well, the trapped value today is in the company who's leasing the space, but of course, that lease will expire. So now the trapped value is in the asset of the building. So Salesforce Tower, it's now the landmark building of San Francisco's business skyline, 61 floors. Well, they're not going to use them all, right? And now maybe they can fill Salesforce Tower because it's a very glamorous building, but that means some other buildings are going to go foul. So there's going to be a real challenge to figure out, well, what do we do with that space? And I think there's actually, initially it's going to be an economic burden for sure. But if you say, well, wait a minute, because it's not just, by the way, it's not just the buildings. We're not going to commute as much either. So now all of a sudden you're thinking, well, maybe we could use space and transportation in much more socially supportive ways. For recreation, for quality of life. You think about Amsterdam and how all the bicycles work so well in Amsterdam. Well, they don't work very well in San Francisco because there's too many cars. But you think, well, if there aren't as many cars, maybe we can reconstruct. And with the pandemic, what happened in the United States, at least, is a lot of restaurants moved their seating outside because that was safer. Well, now what we discovered, of course, is we like eating outside. Europe has known this for a long time, but the Americans did not. We didn't know it very well in America. So the idea is, whoa, maybe we should redesign the way we do sidewalks and streets, and maybe put a little less emphasis on streets and a little more emphasis on sidewalks. So I think there's going to be a redefinition of space. I think governments, and particularly local governments and communities, I think should reimagine their world. Where the capital is going to come from is not obvious to me. So I think you have to think about how this is going to get funded. But I think there's an opportunity there. And otherwise, it just decays. Then you have value decay. And the problem with value decay as we saw with like in a city like Detroit, when the automobile industry went through a very difficult time, decay leads to just blight, urban blight. I mean, it leads to really horrific living conditions and work conditions. So there's a risk here that the society needs to pay attention to.
Which business books that had major influence on you would you recommend to young entrepreneurs?
There were a number of business books that had an influence on me when I was young. By the way, those books are probably not even on Kindle, right? So, I mean, there's a guy named Peter Drucker, who was a famous guy, Tom Peters, Jim Collins, Adrian Slowatsky, Michael Treacy, Michael Hammer, and Jim Champion, those guys. I mean, there was a bunch of people. Probably Clayton Christensen with The Innovator's Dilemma, one of the biggest influences on me. Regis McKenna with the Regis Touch. So there's a bunch. Having said that, I think a young entrepreneur needs to have a young list. Well, the good news is, if you go onto LinkedIn, you always see people saying, "Here are my 10 best business books." So I would just go to one of those lists and read those 10 books.
You are speaking at tech conferences. You are consulting large corporations. You are advising startups. What is your take on work-life balance?
Interesting. So, well, first of all, there's my own work-life balance, but then there's their work-life balance. The truth of the matter is, because of Zoom, I'm able to do a lot more than I could ever do before, because I don't spend time commuting, flying to cities, or doing those kinds of work. I mean, I miss a little bit of it. I actually would like to do some more in person. I'd like to do some large events again, because I think there's an energy in a large event that's very exciting, and there's certainly a creative energy by having everybody in the same room. So I'm hoping we can get to we're actually in a very unbalanced situation right now, where 95% of my contact with my whether it's speaking or advising or anything is digital. I'm in this room, so that I'd like to get that more balanced. But also, I have nobody. I have nobody reporting to me. So all that stuff that most business people have, all that email they have to answer, all those committee meetings they have to go to, blah, 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 write the performance reviews. No, I don't do any of that stuff. So my work is very joyful for me. So therefore, I'm doing it largely because it's joyful. And I believe in the ideas that I promote. And so I want other people to at least get exposed to them. And if they want to implement them, I want to help. So that's where my energy is. Now, when I look at my clients, I think the pandemic has created a really interesting imbalance in work-life balance, because first of all, we thought, well, work's going to go get by the wayside. Not so. Most companies I know have become more efficient, not less efficient, during the pandemic, because from a task execution point of view, working digitally and remotely is actually, as long as you know your task and as long as you know your community of collaboration, it's much more efficient to work remotely than it is to go to an office and work in an office. What you miss a number of things. You miss the human side of work. Is a really important social reaffirmation of identity, personality, meaning, value. So we want to go to work for those reasons. And so we need to do that. And then also, if you're going to problem solve, and particularly if you're going to negotiate across a community of interests where there's conflicting interests, and most businesses, have very conflicting interests inside of themselves as to where we should invest the next dollar, or who should make the sacrifice in favor of whom else. You need to do those things in person. Now, and by the way, the third thing is, when people go to work, they need their own space. This notion that we can all just show up at some virtual desk somewhere is baloney. It's not true. Nobody lives that way. We all, and you look behind me, this is my space, right? And it's not some else's space. And so I think there's a bunch of things we're going to be redefining in the next year or two around what does the new work-life balance look like. Women in particular who had worked at home and had children at home was such an unreasonable request. It's what happened. It was the pandemic. Nobody wanted it to happen. But what that became very, very clear is that we have to figure out a better way to handle raising a family and working half remote, half at work. We need to figure that balance out better. We don't have it right yet. I think there's the will to make it right, but I think it's going to take some work. And frankly, the last thing I'll just say is that Silicon Valley itself, the entrepreneurial culture itself, is workaholic. I mean, these are the people that I consult with see work as their identity. They would work, even if they would work, and they work 40, 60 hours a week by choice, not because they're, and it's not, is it for the money? Well, the money is sort of like a way of keeping score, but do people play football for the score? No, they play football to play football, but they want to win. So it's sort of like that. But there's a danger in that, because if you over-rotate to work, you under-rotate family and self, and you can burn out and you can burn your family out. So there's a dark side to the entrepreneurial culture that we just need to honor, understand, and then manage.
We have come to the end of today's discussion, which I found very useful and highly insightful. On behalf of the Global Young Entrepreneur Society, Geoffrey Moore, thank you very much for speaking with me today.
Well, Daniel, it was a pleasure, and thank you for thinking to reach out to me.